Welcome to NAMPO Virtual. My name is Chris Burgess. I'm editor of Landbou Weekblad, and we're discussing the profitability of the livestock sector today. And with me in the studio is Dr. Michael Bradfield. He's CEO of the Wagyu Breed Society and also head of the LRF. Welcome, Michael.
Yes,
nice having you here.
Always nice to be with you, Chris, and have these discussions.
Michael, so what has been in the news for the past few months has been the ship, the Al-Mawashi, and they have now left with their load of sheep eventually to the Middle East. Why, firstly, has this ship caused the controversy that it has caused, and why is it important to agriculture?
Yes, Chris, I think let's go back a step and look at the profitability of the livestock enterprise in South Africa. And it's something I've often written about in your magazines, for example. The fact of the matter is that we at least 30-40% behind in prices compared to our international competitors. The USA, Australia, Europe is right up there. It's more than 30-40%. New Zealand, about 30-40%. So, as you know, I work in the genetics industry. But for our people to want to spend money in the genetics industry, they have to have profitable livestock enterprises. And so I wrote that article, a new vision, future vision for the livestock industry, and recognized that exports has to be a crux part of it. If we can raise the prices of our livestock in South Africa to be internationally competitive, then people can invest in the industry, and we can improve our RPO levy, for example, which is a pitiful 10 Rand compared to the 150 Rand that our competitor countries are in. So there's very little money going into research and investment in our industry. And so I almost took a big picture approach rather than just focusing on the genetics industry in which I work. And part of any strategic plan should be your export plan, if you want to put it that. If you look at MLA in Australia, Cattlemen's Association in the USA, the USA is a very good example. They export 10% of their product, all the high-value products, the ribeyes, the fillets, all those things we really want to eat. And then they import 12% of their product, which is the ground beef, as they call it, hamburger meat, etc. And that's a very good model to use because we're often in South Africa, we have a very big, we're an emerging country, development country, and so you can't take protein away from the masses either. But you can fill that protein in with protein that is cost effective for the market. And so when Al-Mawashi contacted me and said they're really struggling to get farmers on side and the umbrella bodies to support them, I said it's crucial that we have an export industry. And you know, the Middle East is arguably the highest value export industry that you can get into. And for South Africa, we struggle with our foot and mouth, our biosecurity, etc. We struggled to get into those markets. So Al-Mawashi and the ship, that was a good start getting into these very high value markets that we got into. The controversy, I think, comes from the fact that people South Africans in particular, have never had this happen where we have had live exports. Australia has it all the time, and New Zealand has it all the time. And believe it or not, because I've worked there, many African countries, actually Ethiopia is a good example. They put 600,000 cattle onto ships every single year and export those just around the corner into Egypt, etc. So it is about raising the value for all livestock producers to actually start making money so that we can invest into our industry.
But if this live exports has been such an established practice in countries like Australia, why is it still so controversial? I mean, surely at this point, let's be honest, animal welfare is important to everyone. For farmers, maybe more than most because it's what they farm with. They've got an affinity for their animals. So if it's such an established practice, why are we still struggling with the export? Why is it still so controversial? Surely all that has been addressed already.
Yes, look, it's even controversial in those countries we've just mentioned. And I think it's because none of the public have ever been on a ship, for example. You know, I also frown on the whole practice until I actually went onto a ship myself in Melbourne. I was invited on there, and I couldn't believe what I saw. It was completely contradictory to how I imagined the ship to be. You almost think it's like at a cattle sale yard. They're all yarded together and they stuffed in completely differently to what I experienced. And in fact, if you look at the mortalities of those ships, you'll find that they're a fraction of a percentage of the mortalities in feedlots, for example. And I mean, that is a good indicator of the ethical side of things. You know, if animals are happy and they're eating and they can lie down properly, and you've got proper secure places for them to lie down, for example, they've got proper ventilation in the ships, then there's no reason. But I think something also to take cognizance of, Chris, is that about 1 or 2% of people still have in the consumers, this is the US and figures now I'm quoting, 1% of US consumers have any affinity to the farm. So this is the whole vegan, vegetarian drive either, because they've lost contact with where their milk comes from, you know, for example, you know. And so I think to a large extent, consumers have literally lost contact with what happens on a farming enterprise, for example.
But doesn't that come back to what you were saying earlier, that the funding that the industry has made available to itself, because it's self-funding, isn't high enough to actually be able to do this public relations job? Because I mean, surely no one's going to take up the cudgels for the livestock industry if they don't do it for themselves. I mean, who else must do it?
Absolutely correct. And this is something that needs to happen. We have to invest in our own industry. Can you imagine a business that has to thrive and survive, not investing at all in research and development of that business, and really having enough funding for marketing, and have enough money to open exports for that business, for example? At the moment, we leave it to individual feedlots, for example, to open those exports for us. We need a far more comprehensive plan to put all this together, almost like a master plan, if you want to put it that, and then drive it through the industry bodies to be able to enable that. At the moment, our industry, we have very good umbrella bodies. Let me start with that. And now we have to support those umbrella bodies. I get exceptionally upset when I hear farmers saying, let's break down umbrella bodies and every guy for himself. Because I mean, you can think that's exactly the opposite way of what you should be going. Sure. But we should be saying to ourselves, let us fund the umbrella bodies properly. We make them accountable. And they do, you know, farmers need to sit on those boards. But we need to be able to invest so that we can export properly. And when we get into the higher value markets, things like biosecurity come into play. And which leads us almost into a second conversation, is about traceability, for example. It's actually sad that South Africa doesn't have a comprehensive biosecurity plan as far as traceability is concerned. Especially if we're going to go into the export markets. You know,
because you need it. I mean, you can't export without traceability.
It's critical. And if you look at Africa, let's forget about the West. If you look at Africa, Namibia has had a traceability system for between 25 and 30 years, which works. Every single livestock, beef animal in Namibia is traceable from farm.
And they're exporting to some of the most wealthy markets, the Norwegian market, the European market, correct?
Absolutely right. You know,
so if they can get it right, why can't we?
It's exactly the point. Look, I think traditionally we've always been an importer of beef or red meat. And so there's never been a drive for us to look at these things differently. But with the rand devaluing that it has over the last decade or 2 decades, it's now, people have woken up to the value that foreign currency can bring into the country. And so that's made traceability and exports and then traceability so important. So you need to be exporting to be the catalyst for traceability to happen. And it raises everybody's game. Because if you put traceability in place, for the first time an animal actually, like a car has a number plate, an animal actually now has a number plate. You imagine taking all the number plates of all the cars in South Africa and saying that's how we're going to live our life. It wouldn't happen. If your cattle or livestock are valuable to you, you want them properly identified.
Sure.
So start just with that. And then of course the recording and all that goes with it, that raises the game for everybody.
So the identification of livestock doesn't only have to do with exports. It's got to do with animal health. It's got to do with security, livestock theft.
Good farm management.
The whole works.
Everything.
So I mean, it's just a win-win. I mean, surely.
Completely. But there's got to be a will. I think the will is now there. You know, and so we now look at the authorities. I think one of the challenges that we have is for government to work with industry, or industry to work with government. You know, it's not always an easy thing for our farmers to get their head around that. But I think we got to be emotionally mature And so how can we make this happen? Namibia is a very good example with that. If you look at the livestock industry, they work well with their government. The government works well with their livestock industry. It's a symbiotic relationship. I think we need to develop that in South Africa.
Michael, we both come from the from the Eastern Cape, where there are big former communal areas. From where I sit, and my perspective on it is, I mean, sitting in South Africa, the economic figures have just come out yesterday. It's not looking good. We expected it after the lockdown. But we are desperate the country is desperate to develop high-value industries that will earn us forex, that will create jobs. Now, if I look at South Africa and I look at what is available for us, and I look at where we come from in the Eastern Cape, and I look at these communal areas, and you take into account that 40 plus of the national herd is actually under communal management. I mean, isn't there a huge opportunity here if we could build an export industry that you could, much like the wool industry in these communal areas, where you could get communal cattle farmers, you could up their game in terms of production, and you could get them into this high-value export chain. I mean, isn't this a huge economic opportunity just waiting to happen?
Chris, 100% correct. It's a no-brainer. You know, to get back to Al-Mawashi, 25% of all those sheep on that ship comes from communal areas in the Transkei, and we know where those sheep are coming from, you know, and how valuable them entering a high-value market is for those communal farmers. The commercial farmers, it's a given. And sometimes, even as a commercial industry, we can't underestimate the value and how communities like that actually get sucked in correctly and rise to the challenge. The flour market in Kenya, if you ever want to see something really impressive, you look at the smallholder farmers producing flours for the European market. And when I looked at that model, I said, you know, South Africa can do the same in the livestock sector with these communal areas. But raise the bar and say, this is where the bar is. And if you can do A, B, C, D, you can also export your animals. I think just to, we don't want all animals to be exported live. Let's just mention that as well.
Can we just quickly, just for the benefit of our viewers, why are there live animal exports? Why aren't we slaughtering animals here and taking the carcasses over?
Absolutely right. Because the Middle East has a cultural reason for doing that. We can sort of understand that being from the Transkei, for example, where you want to slaughter an animal because of the ancestors, etc. You know, you're not going to give us a lobola, for example, a carcass. You know, you're going to give a live animal. It's exactly the same principle. It's a cultural thing for the Middle East to want to take your animal to appease the religious gods that they have, and that's why they're prepared to pay almost sometimes ridiculous prices for these animals. It's
a bit like the goat market, where it's also sort of cultural practices. Yeah.
It's exactly the same, and so that's why those markets are so lucrative. Yeah.
So Michael, if we had to summarize the situation here, so as I'm listening from you, so the first problem is we have almost a crisis of profitability in our livestock industry when you consider the fact that we're earning almost only a third of what our competitors in
about half, yeah,
about half,
to two-thirds, yeah.
Which is bad enough. That the Australians and the Americans are earning because they've got these lucrative export markets. Yes. Correct.
You know, the Americans estimate that just their 10% of exports raises every carcass by 3,000 rand, just over 3,000 rand. I mean, you imagine putting 3,000 rand onto a carcass. Immediately, you're taking a marginal livestock enterprise and you're turning it into a very profitable livestock enterprise. It then creates employment. And so everybody benefits. I think that's something that we mustn't underestimate either. The employment that gets created from being able to export. We would like everything to go through as carcasses because our abattoirs benefit. South Africa's got lots of feedlots, abattoirs, etc. And if we get to the stage, I believe, where the live export starts putting pressure on the abattoirs, etc., then we put a quota system in place, for example, that will happen in countries like Australia. So everybody, it must be a win-win-win throughout the value chain.
So if it's such a clear-cut case, what are the major blockages at the moment? Why aren't we getting this sorted out?
I think again, it comes down to funding. I think it comes down to a fragmented industry. I think probably shouldn't say it, a lack of clear vision from an industry to exactly where they want to be and want to be able to go, and for people to be able to see the opportunities. I've been lucky. For 6-7 years, I worked internationally as a World Bank consultant and consultant for some of the big NGOs, where I saw countries like Pakistan, India. They have very strong bodies that open up markets for them. MLA in Australia. I mean, that's possibly the best example, where in every single continent they work together with the embassies to drive those exports. You know how difficult it is to, for example, get protocols between countries in place. I'm sort of part of that process sometimes. It's almost impossible sometimes to get protocols in place, because you've got to get government to talk to government, etc.
It's government to government. It's not the private sector that can get involved.
That's right, but the private sector needs to help that process, and we need to be able to be part of that.
But if you look at what the poultry industry has done and the master plan that they've come up with, I mean, surely there's a plan to be made in the red meat industry.
Yes. Look, I think there is a strategic plan. But we need, I serve on some of these boards, and there's also a lot of pushback from farmers. If you ask a farmer to put 1 cent into development of an industry, they tend to want to run away, because they remember the past of how the old boards used to operate, and they were very bureaucratic in their way of doing things. There was no open market, and I think they stagnated to some extent in the past as well. I'm for democracy and opening up the markets, but I think as an industry you also need to see where the opportunities are and work together to be able to achieve that. Cattlemen's Association in America, I actually did some work for them, and I couldn't believe the support that I got as a foreign NGO. MLA in Australia, for example, who sponsored my PhD, for example. I mean, Australian organisation sponsoring a PhD of a South African. Can you think about it? But I thought I could value add their industry as well. So it's just, if there's a will, there's a way. And I think we need to, but there are green shoots, Chris. Things are happening.
Because, I mean, once again, I mean, you can just look at the wool industry. I mean, getting into these lucrative markets, we've got a well-established history of exporting wool. So it's just basically a culture change of moving from a net import of red meat into an export-orientated international industry.
Oh, you've summed it up exactly that. Things have changed. Our currency's got weaker, and you can imagine as we develop an export industry, getting foreign currency into South Africa, what it will do. It means you're not reliant on the fluctuation of the rand. Which is a big problem for us at the moment. So you're benchmarking yourself. I also need to mention that the international industry has two prices as well. You get something called commodity beef, and you get something called high-value beef. And we've got to be very careful that we don't, at the moment we're getting into the commodity beef side of things, just because of the sheer fact that our meat is so cheap.
A bit like our wine.
Very much so. And that's also why I decided to get into the Wagyu business, for example, so that I could see if I can't assist the industry to get into a high-value type of market. Not all beer is exactly the same. You can differentiate. And wine, you can differentiate. Whiskey, you can differentiate. Whereas beef in South Africa traditionally didn't differentiate itself as a product. So whereas if you go elsewhere in the world, it's completely differentiated. From commodity beef to high value to very high value beef, for example. So we also need to see, and we've got excellent product. We've got excellent abattoirs. We've got very high standards, etc. But you need to make that step up when you go international. And so it also takes us to a grading system compared to a classification system. And I'm pleased to report that they're now looking at a grading system in South Africa and developing one. But because it needs to happen, because as you get into the higher value markets, everything else goes up with it, and it pulls the whole thing up. So if you look at the international markets, the ones that really pay, Russia, high premiums, South Korea, high premiums, Japan, high premiums. We're not in any of those markets as we speak, but those guys pay, the 200-300 rand a kilo type of prices. China, very, very a big opportunity for us, but also has some very big challenges, because it's also to extent like South Africa, also challenged to get into the Chinese market. But if you look at the graphs, Chris, you'll see that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, China hardly imported any beef. And they now, I think it's 4.5 kilos per person. Well, multiply that by 1 billion people.
It's amazing.
And suddenly you can look at the tonnage that they're importing, and which are and they only import from a handful of countries. You know, it's Brazil, it's Argentina, it's Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, I think are the 5. The US has just got into China.
And as I always say, I mean, South Africa, we're one of the last countries in the world as a communist party, effectively in government in the Tripart Alliance. Surely we should be getting preferential entry into China.
We must. And I think there are some challenges we can discuss at another time of getting into that market. But we've got to applaud government. You know, government opened that door for us to get into China, and we must applaud them for the work that they've done. But we've got to take it the next step. Delgado predicted that milk and meat has to double by the year 2050 because of just the world population getting more affluent.
And wanting more protein.
But that only depends on China. So if you take China out of it, that model doesn't work. You know, so that's how important China is in this model.
To our beef industry. Michael, we could still talk another half an hour as we normally do. Thank you so much for coming in, and thank you for sharing our insights. And let us hope that we get these export markets sorted out sooner than later. And let's hope that the Al-Mawashi debacle was the first step to a brighter future for the livestock industry. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you very much for joining us. That was a discussion with Dr. Michael Bradfield, CEO of the Wagyu and also from the LRF. Join us a bit later for further discussions on the livestock industry. We'll be having one every day here on virtual NAMPO. Enjoy the rest of NAMPO and see you soon. Thank you.